I think you're wrong.
Which part?
All of it. I think there's no good in the filth that I put down. That's what I think.
And how do you know?
I just know. Look around, man. This city, it stinks. It's a sewer. It stinks and it smells like shit, and I can't get the stink out of my nose. I think that this world, it needs men that are willing to make the hard call. That's what I think. I think you and me are the same. We're the same. You know it. Only I do the one thing that you can't. You hit them and they get back up. I hit them and they stay down. It's permanent.
I live in the real world,
Yeah.
so I've seen it.
What have you seen?
Redemption, Frank. It's real.
Jesus
And it's
Christ.
possible. The people you murdered deserve another chance.
What, to kill again, rape again? Is that what
No,
you
Frank,
want?
to try again, Frank. To try.
Part of the beauty of film is that you're offered the ability to encounter an experience you would never have on your own. Whether that be a lost robot, a mentally unstable clown, a lonely farm boy on a desert planet, great stories tell us something about the overall human experience. I would argue religion tries to do the same thing. Part of why religion has lasted for as long as it has is because it tries answering many of life's questions that science itself can't answer. Of course, it can be hard to connect with religion when many of its leaders improperly teach doctrine or outright hurt people in God's name. This is where I think good film comes in. We're able to understand why someone believes what they do without having to confront anyone. That is part of why I love Daredevil. The way his faith is integrated into his story portrays some great themes that say something about life. This is truly what sets him apart from other heroes. He's not just your run-of-the-mill vigilante. Since Ms. Marvel was marketed as the first popular Muslim superhero, I was hoping to see something similar in this show. How would the messages of Islam be integrated into Kamala Khan's story? What lessons can we learn from the Muslim experience? I was hoping to see this because we haven't really seen this type of story in the West. There's obviously a lot of negative stigmas surrounding Islam, especially post 9/11, so a show that would portray the Muslim experience has the potential to be a great story. But unfortunately, Ms. Marvel just ended up being a pretty generic Disney Plus show. Kamala's Islamic and Pakistani roots are kind of a backdrop to the plot. Now, there's a lot of other problems with the show that contribute to its mediocrity, most notably the short season and rushed writing. But I seriously feel like adding religious subtext to Kamala's story would add a lot of depth and personality to the show. In this video, I'll be comparing Daredevil and Ms. Marvel to explain why the religious themes, or lack thereof, contribute to the show's quality. Now, before we continue, if you personally connected with Ms. Marvel, that's great. But for the most part, both her show and her character have pretty much been forgotten. And I personally believe adding religious subtext could have heightened her show immensely. With that out of the way, let's begin the discussion. Now, I do want to be transparent here. I am reviewing these shows as a Catholic. While my hope is that I'm talking through an objective lens, I understand if you don't want to hear my points. All of that said, I don't love Daredevil because of my faith. I mean, I think we've all seen our fair share of cringe Christian movies.
Isn't that sort of like what Jesus meant when he said that we should love our enemies? Yes.
We're going to prove once and for all that God is dead.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The reason so many people love Daredevil is because it actually has good writing and directing. It's not a 3-season sermon. It's a genuinely great story that weaves Catholic themes into it. Part of what makes Daredevil stand out from other heroes is his relationship with his faith. It is directly tied to why he fights crime. When Matt was a kid, he believed God gave him the gift of enhanced hearing so he could answer God's prayers for him, especially in situations where the law wasn't enough. However, while Matt believes he's a soldier for God, he often struggles with figuring out what that means, or if it's even worth it. For example, there's some great conversations Matt has with Father Lantom in Season 1. He's contemplating if he should kill Kingpin for the atrocities he's committed. He even goes so far as to call him the devil.
Do you believe in the devil, Father?
Yes, Matthew. I believe he walks among us, taking many forms.
What if you could have stopped him from ever hurting anyone again?
Stop them how?
Now, a lesser show would have gotten overly preachy. Instead, Father Lantom poses Daredevil a philosophical inquiry. Another man's evil does not make you good. Men have used the atrocities of their enemies to justify their own throughout history. So, the question you have to ask yourself is, are you struggling with the fact that you don't want to kill this man but have to? Or that you don't have to kill him, but want to. This is the constant struggle Matt faces as a Catholic, because he inherently believes it's wrong to take any life. We are all broken people. We are all capable of evil. Who's to argue we are better than anyone else? This is beautifully portrayed in Daredevil Season 2 when he argues with the Punisher about this very thing.
I don't do this to hurt people.
Yeah, so what is that, just a job perk?
I don't kill anyone.
Is that why you think you're better than me?
No.
Is that why you think you're a big hero?
It doesn't matter what I think or what I am. People don't have to die.
Come on, Red, you believe that?
I believe it's not my call, and it ain't yours either.
You know what I think you, hero? You know you're one bad day away from being me.
And Frank almost proved him right. After a tragic incident, Daredevil almost abandons his faith, blaming God for his injuries and the death of the woman he loved. He's even more determined now to kill Kingpin and himself if necessary.
In front of this God, I'd rather die as the devil than live as Matt Murdock.
But it is through his faith that he learns to find the humanity in himself and in Fisk.
Come on! Kill me! No! God knows I want you, but you don't get to destroy who I am!
Catholics believe in the redemptive power of Christ, meaning that Jesus comes to us in our brokenness and uses that to transform the world into a better place. But that can be hard to believe when you can't directly speak to God or when you think you have to play by the enemy's rules. This struggle Matt faces is part of what makes him such a compelling character. Again, Catholicism isn't used as a soapbox or a marketing strategy trying to get you to church. It doesn't shove an ideology down our throat. The faith challenges Daredevil as a character and forges his identity. When we watch Matt go on his journey, we are forced to ask ourselves the same questions. Are we an idealist like Daredevil, or a cynic like the Punisher? This is the mark of a great story. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for Ms. Marvel. For all this talk of Muslim representation, Islam really isn't that important to Kamala's character. I wouldn't say Ms. Marvel is as performative as something like She-Hulk or, 90% of race swaps. However, the Islamic and Pakistani elements are more of a backdrop than an actually important component of the show. It's nice to see the rituals and traditions, but what do they have to do with Kamala's journey? There are a few elements that are relevant to the story, which I'll touch on in a bit. But if you replace the mosque with the church, if you switch the Eid festival with Oktoberfest, if the Bengals were from China instead of Pakistan, would anything change about the story? No. These things add some flavor to the show, sure, but they're about as important as skins in a video game. They generally don't affect the mechanics or the gameplay. This is not something you can say about Daredevil. If there was no seal of confession, he wouldn't have confided in Father Lantom. Without those discussions, we wouldn't have been able to understand Matt's struggles, which is the entire basis of the show. Catholic doctrine is intrinsically tied to his conflicts with Kingpin and the Punisher. This is not the case for Ms. Marvel. I'm not saying the show isn't authentic. I'm not Muslim or Pakistani, so I really can't speak on that end. But it would be cool for Islam to actually matter for the first popular Muslim superhero. Why else would you heavily market yourself as a show about a Muslim if you aren't going to dive into Muslim beliefs? Now, I understand that part of the point was to break away from harmful stereotypes and make Kamala seem normal.
So we really wanted to make it normal and normalize the Muslim experience, if you will. And that's how it kind of was for me. It wasn't, being Pakistani, being Muslim wasn't my entire personality. This is the time I wake up. This is the time I have breakfast. This is the time I pray. This is the time I go to school. It was just a part of my schedule, like an extracurricular. And that's how we wanted to show it. We didn't want to glamorize religion or the culture or anything. We just wanted to show it as it is in real life.
Okay, but that's kind of a problem, right? For something as important as religious experience, especially when that background has led to the discrimination and even extermination of entire people, simply calling it an extracurricular is honestly pretty bad. This should be something that guides every part of your story. Even if you're against religion, that principle still guides your actions. Look, they didn't have to make Kamala a stereotype or have Islam be her entire personality. Daredevil isn't an old lady who goes to church every morning. Jesus isn't Daredevil's sole trait, but far from it. But it's still an important one. They made Kamala so normal that her faith doesn't really matter to the character. She seems mostly apathetic to it. She barely mentions anything related to her culture outside of required exposition like what the jinn are. The thing is, Kamala is not a normal person. She's a Pakistani Muslim who lives in the US. That experience is inevitably different from the vast majority of Americans, even if she decided not to believe in God. In normalizing her, they've essentially stripped what makes Ms. Marvel a potentially great character. As far as the MCU version of the character, what sets her apart from other heroes? What exactly drives her to help people? The most we really get is that she idolizes Captain Marvel, which already doesn't make sense, but that's irrelevant. Wanting to be like your favorite hero doesn't make you one. A good comparison would be DC's Booster Gold in his early days. He originally became a superhero solely for fame and money. That isn't the mark of a true hero because it's a selfish reason. Of course, this starting motivator can be used to turn these characters into real heroes, but as for Ms. Marvel, they never really dove into this. We get one scene where Kamala is talking to her mother about how getting powers was a lot harder than what she imagined. But like, has it really been that hard? Sure, damage control was being a nuisance, but it's not like they were invading people's homes or severely injuring people. And the stuff with the clandestines wasn't much of an issue until after this conversation. We haven't seen Kamala go through much strife, so most of the character moments feel extremely contrived or generic. In Daredevil, we see the toll fighting crime takes on him, both physically and spiritually. So when he's talking to Father Lantom and pouring out his frustrations, we can understand where he's coming from. Killing Kingpin would be easier. Laying down the mantle of Daredevil would be nice. But that would go against everything Matt believes in. What if instead of Captain Marvel being Kamala's inspiration, it was her Muslim faith? Reading all the teachings from the Quran, seeing the good work of her Imam, hearing the suffering of her community, these can all be deep motivating factors for Kamala. For American audiences, this would be a uniquely different experience. One that would force us to ponder on a different but ultimately relatable experience. But as it stands, Ms. Marvel is kind of just your run-of-the-mill superhero. I don't see anyone talk about her anymore, and we all know how the Marvels performed at the box office. And what's weirder is that the show simultaneously wants to normalize the Muslim experience while also telling us every 5 minutes why they aren't normal. This mostly comes from Nakia voicing her frustrations about how the West treats Muslims. I don't have a problem with the message. The problem is that these are political statements that have almost nothing to do with the story at hand. For example, we get a scene where Kamala says Nakia makes life look easy. Nakia's response is saying that it's actually very hard because she's stuck being too brown for Americans yet too white for Muslims. That's interesting. But there was very little set for this scene. We've barely seen Nakia up until this point, so you never get the sense that she's playing life on tutorial mode. We've already discussed that Kamala hasn't really faced strife, but Ms. Marvel also has secret superpowers now, which isn't really similar to Nakia's situation, even mentally. So instead of an organically crafted scene that makes us ask questions about racial identity, we instead have a statement that feels randomly inserted to make a political point. Another example happens in episode 2. Kamala and Nakia are in the mosque during a lecture by Sheikh Abdullah. Let's take a look at the scene.
They really gotta fix this place? No. You mean they gotta fix our section of this place? See, but the men's section is pristine. We got mold under the carpets, and the walls are literally crumbling.
Okay, I know this adage can be annoying, but the scene broke the rule show don't tell. How? We don't actually see how bad the women's side of the mosque is. We're never really shown either side, so there's nothing for the audience to base off. We don't have any scenes of the characters having it rough or any of the other women complaining. We don't see the decrepit state of the carpet or the supposedly pristine men's side. So we're kind of just left to take Nakia's word for it. Because there is absolutely zero build-up for this scene, it just comes off as a shallow statement by the writers telling Muslim leaders to treat women better. Again, Daredevil avoids this by pinning the question on the audience, not telling them what to think. I don't side with Daredevil because he uses some buzzwords. I side with him because we see the consequences of his rivals. Forcing an old lady out of her home, the enslavement of women and children, a scared man who wants a redo at life. The show may have things to say. The show obviously has Catholic teaching as its anchor, but it doesn't villainize you for thinking otherwise, especially when we see characters like the Punisher who ultimately share the same mission as Daredevil, stopping evil. If someone were to tell me they agreed with the Punisher, I could understand why, because the show expertly crafted his point of view through the death of his family. Oh, and Jon Bernthal's amazing acting too. Again, Daredevil is great because it offers both points of view, and while the writers obviously side with Matt Murdock, it's ultimately up to the audience to decide if he's right. There's one scene in Ms. Marvel that was actually pretty close to making the Muslim experience matter. That was when Damage Control first go into the mosque looking for Kamala. They're coming in very rude and disrespecting the religious traditions by not removing their shoes. Nakia and Sheikh Abdullah push back on the suits, making a couple of statements about how the government treats Muslims. In isolation, I don't have a huge problem with this scene. The US government has mistreated Muslims in the wake of global terrorism. But like we mentioned earlier, Damage Control hadn't really done anything too incriminating. Sure, they were rude and pretty quick to think Ms. Marvel was a South Asian, but they never violated anyone's rights. Were they ever really a serious threat in the show? This could have been a great way to portray the experience of Muslims in a post 9/11 America. But instead, we ended up with a pretty forgettable storyline and an off-putting scene telling the government to F off. Now, I do think Ms. Marvel's Pakistani roots have an actual effect on the character. The partition directly ties back to the way her grandma acts, which ties back to Kamala's mom being strict. The family dynamic was caused by a cultural moment, which ultimately is what started Ms. Marvel's journey. However, there are still a few problems here. For one, the partition was part of this weird family mystery that turned into a pretty dumb time travel subplot. It was used more as a mystery box instead of something that caused deep-rooted issues in the family. But more importantly, Kamala also seems apathetic to her Pakistani roots. The only reason she goes to Pakistan is to progress the plot and add world building for the Red Daggers, not an inherent curiosity about her culture. Plus, once she gets there, she complains that she wants to sleep more, instead of touring where her family is from. She's not giddy like she is with Ms. Marvel or Kamran. And mind you, this is her first time visiting Pakistan. Like, seriously? Most of this subplot was completely irrelevant and uninteresting. Why couldn't the grandma just go to the States? We pretty much get the exact same outcome outside of a few exposition dumps from the Red Daggers. Again, it's just a skin that doesn't really add anything to the show.
Disappointed!
Now, I don't want to just complain and, end it there. I want to give some concepts that I think really could have elevated the show. Oh, and of course, I'll be using Daredevil for inspiration on both story aspects and a general vibe for what Ms. Marvel could have been. Now, I don't want to start a war in the comments over some of the points I'll bring up. I have a very limited understanding of Islam, and while I did my best to research some of these terms, I might not be 100% accurate, so please be forgiving if I get something wrong. That said, I think the easiest and most interesting concept they could have played with was jihad. Many of us think jihad means enacting a holy war against non-Muslims, and while that is certainly the most popular use of the word, especially amongst extremists, that's not the full extent of the definition. The direct translation of the word from Arabic means to struggle or exert strength and force. Of course, this can take on many forms. The stereotypical sense of warfare is coined lesser jihad. However, greater jihad is used to refer to a deeper, more intimate struggle with the soul. Much like how Christians are supposed to reflect on their sins and bettering themselves, jihad functions in a similar way. Ismail Fenni from the Islamic Society of Boston puts it nicely. Jihad means to struggle. We struggle to get a good life. That's jihad. You struggle to be an honest person. That's jihad. You struggle to be a good religious person. That's jihad. Jihad is not picking up a gun or making a bomb and killing innocent people. Now, it seems like there are conflicting thoughts on which sources give the quote-unquote true meaning of jihad, and to be honest, it's a lot of lore that's kind of besides the point. All of this is to say, Ms. Marvel could have delved into this idea of jihad to really explore the mind of Kamala Khan. All of her struggles as a student, as a daughter, as a superhero. This could have been an extremely complex story, one that's through the lens of an important Muslim belief. In Daredevil, Matt Murdock constantly faces Catholic guilt, especially when he believes he should have done more to save lives. In a similar way, Kamala could face this inner struggle as she must deal with conflicts against her classmates or the US government. Another potentially interesting concept could be what Islam means. One definition means submitting to God's will. Another literally translates to peace. How exactly do these two correlate? Muslims believe that completely surrendering to God's will bring peace to you and the world. This isn't very far off from Christian teaching. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Whoever loves his life loses it, and whoever hates his life in this world will preserve it for eternal life." Inner peace comes through the rejection of the self. In both religions, it is only by following God can we truly heal our brokenness. This is what Daredevil struggles with in his 3rd season. Like I mentioned earlier, he blames God for all the problems in his life. He cites the book of Job, questioning how God could abandon his perfect soldier. But Matt has a distorted view of God. He checks all of the boxes, he has a deep sense of justice, but he is angry because he believes God is supposed to owe him something. But Christians are called to have a relationship with Jesus. It's not a transactional service. It's not supposed to be a situation of I'll rub your belly, you rub mine kind of thing. This is the lesson Matt learns by the end of the season. There's a beautiful quote he says talking about our relationship with God.
He told me something years ago when this happened that I never forgot. See, I was pretty angry at God and bitter towards his world. How could a loving God blind me? Anyway, he told me God's plan is like a beautiful tapestry. And the tragedy of being human is that we only get to see it from the back, with all the ragged threads and the muddy colors. We only get a hint at the true beauty that would be revealed if we could see the whole pattern on the other side, as God does.
This scene tries to give an answer to suffering. In this fallen world, one that has rejected God, we are forced to face chaos and pain. It is hard to understand what God's plan is because there is a veil that disconnects us from him. But ultimately his goal is to deliver us from the darkness, to turn that pain into a force for good. Matt's blindness is ultimately what allows him to help people. What if they incorporated the themes of jihad and peace into Ms. Marvel's powers? In the comics, she has stretchy and morphing powers similar to Mr. Fantastic. When she's first exposed to her powers, she accidentally transforms into Captain Marvel. This is due to a sense of insecurity and dissatisfaction Kamala has about her own life. The concepts of Islam work really well here because this would allow us to view Kamala's struggles in both a symbolic and literal sense. I'm not entirely sure how this would apply to the hard light powers. To be honest, I'm not even sure why they changed her powers in the first place. But regardless of her skill set, the actual story could be used to dive into Ms. Marvel's identity. Much like how Father Lantom helped Daredevil navigate his struggles as a hero, Sheikh Abdullah could do the same thing here. Now, I've got some more ideas on potential storylines and villains, but this video is getting long enough as it is. If you're interested in seeing what I do with Ms. Marvel, let me know in the comments and I might make a part 2 for this video. But let's get on with the conclusion. All in all, Ms. Marvel had the potential to be a truly special show. You can really see the creativity the showrunners had in the first 3 episodes. But because of the short season, clunky writing, and the lack of integrating Muslim beliefs into the show, Ms. Marvel ended up being a generic and pretty forgettable show. I'm glad this was a positive depiction of the culture, but outside of a few things, Pakistan and Islam are about as important as video game skins. Which is a shame because this could have introduced people to a potentially great character. The Netflix show was my first introduction to Daredevil, and after 3 seasons, he's quickly become one of my favorite characters. Ironically, Daredevil talks about the faith much better than most priests, and that's because it doesn't talk down to the audience or hold their hand. Now, I'm not Muslim, so I'm not gonna say, if Ms. Marvel connects people to their faith or not, but I would have liked for this show to really dive into the Muslim experience, instead of being another cookie-cutter project on Disney+. At the end of the day, Ms. Marvel is a product of a time when Disney cared more about pushing their streaming service through a content mill instead of creating good stories. Hopefully Ms. Marvel is given a much better treatment in the future, because the projects she's been in haven't given fans much confidence, especially with their incredibly low viewership and box office ratings. But only time will tell. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.